U.S. veteran reunites with Vietnamese daughter after 50 years apart. The summer of 1971 hung heavy over Vietnam. The air was thick with the mingled scents of monsoon rain and diesel fumes, of blooming frangipani trees, and the faint, acrid trace of gunpowder. Somewhere far off, the steady whoop-whoop-whoop of helicopter blades rolled across the humid sky like a distant heartbeat. For Harold Setzer, a young U.S. Air Force serviceman from Tennessee, life in Vietnam had become a strange mixture of contradictions. In the mornings, he'd pass children laughing and splashing along the riverbanks, their voices bright against the dull rumble of military convoys on the road. In the evenings, he'd walk through market streets lit by flickering oil lamps, where vendors sold hot bowls of pho as if the war was nothing more than an inconvenient background noise. It was in one of those market streets that Harold first saw her. She was carrying a basket of morning glory greens, her conical hat casting a shadow over her face. But when she looked up, just for a second, he saw her eyes. They weren't just beautiful, they were steady. In a place where nothing felt certain, her gaze seemed to hold the kind of quiet that Harold didn't even realize he'd been craving. They began talking whenever their paths crossed. At first, it was shy exchanges, smiles, gestures, a few words pieced together from broken English and hesitant Vietnamese. But slowly, something grew between them. War compresses time. Days that might have taken months in peacetime collapsed into weeks. Before long, they were living together in a modest room near the river, sharing small domestic routines like an ordinary couple. She would hum while preparing rice, and he would fix the door hinge so it wouldn't creak. When she told him she was pregnant, Harold felt the ground shift beneath his feet, not with fear, but with joy. He could picture it so clearly, a tiny baby with her mother's eyes, cradled against his chest. For a moment, the war faded, replaced by the simple, stubborn hope that maybe they could have a future. But in Vietnam in 1971, the future was a dangerous thing to plan. By autumn, Harold's visa had expired. The orders were clear. He had to leave the country. There were no extensions, no appeals. One day, he was rocking his 4-month-old daughter to sleep. The next, he was packing his bag under the weight of a promise he wasn't sure he could keep. "I'll come back," he told her mother, his voice steady though his chest felt tight. "I swear it. I'm not leaving you forever." She nodded, but her eyes betrayed the doubt she didn't voice. Harold boarded the plane with the image of his daughter burned into his memory, her tiny fingers curling around his thumb, her breath warm against his neck. He didn't know it then, but that moment would be the last time he'd see her for 50 years. Lost in the years. Back in the United States, life did what it always does. It kept moving. Harold returned to Tennessee, but he carried Vietnam inside him. Not the war stories people expected, but the quiet memories. The smell of wet bamboo, the way his daughter's eyelids fluttered as she drifted to sleep, the sound of his partner's laughter when the power went out and they ate dinner by candlelight. He tried to find them. At first it was letters, carefully addressed, stamped with hope. None came back. Then phone calls, routed through old contacts, but every lead dissolved into static. What Harold didn't know was that after he left, his daughter's life had taken a sharp turn. She had been placed for adoption and given the name Phuong Nguyen. To Harold, she was still his baby girl, known by the name they'd chosen together. He searched under that name for years, never knowing he was chasing a shadow. By the time the internet arrived, Harold was older, but no less determined. He joined online forums for veterans, posted on message boards, and reached out to anyone who might have known her. The responses were kind, but always the same. "Sorry, I don't know her." In 2008, Harold took what felt like a leap into the unknown. He submitted his DNA to a company called Ancestry DNA. He didn't fully understand how it worked, only that somewhere maybe it could connect him to her. Years went by. No matches came. Still, Harold kept his profile active, like leaving a light on in a window for someone who might be walking home in the dark. And then, one ordinary afternoon, the light reached someone. In Connecticut, Phuong's son Stephen sat at a kitchen table with a small cardboard box in front of him. Inside was a DNA kit. He hadn't ordered it with any grand expectations, just a casual curiosity about his ancestry. "I just wanted to know who I am," he later said. When his results came back, one name stood out, a close family match, Harold Setzer. Stephen stared at the screen. The name was unfamiliar, but the relationship marker wasn't. This man was likely his grandfather. The next steps were a mix of disbelief and excitement. Stephen called his mother, Phuong, and together they began piecing the story together. Could this be him, the man she had never met but always wondered about? When they finally reached out, Harold almost didn't believe it. After 50 years of searching, he had trained himself not to get too hopeful. But as the details unfolded, it became undeniable. He had found his daughter. From that moment on, they spoke constantly. Phone calls, video chats, even shared meals over FaceTime. They talked about everything and nothing, trying to fill in 5 decades of missing history. The reunion that ended the war. July 30th, 2024. Memphis International Airport. Travelers hurried past with rolling suitcases, eyes on departure boards, minds on connecting flights. But for Harold, time had slowed to a crawl. Every sound seemed sharper, the squeak of shoes on polished tile, the echo of announcements over the intercom, the rhythmic thud of his own heartbeat. And then, she was there. Phuong approached with 2 young men beside her, his grandsons, Anthony and Stephen. She was no longer the 4-month-old he had held in Saigon, but a woman with the kind of presence that comes from living through things most people never will. Harold stepped forward. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then he opened his arms, and she walked into them. The hug was quiet, but it carried the weight of 50 years. "I'm incredibly happy to have found my daughter," Harold said when they finally stepped back, his voice unsteady but sure. "For me, the war has finally ended." Phuong smiled through tears. "I'm very happy to see my father again." The days that followed were simple but full. Harold took them to Beale Street, the neon signs glowing against the warm summer night as blues music spilled from open doorways. Phuong cooked Vietnamese dishes in his kitchen, the aroma of fish sauce and lemongrass mingling with the smell of Memphis barbecue. They looked through old photographs, told stories, and laughed over small misunderstandings in each other's lives. Anthony watched it all quietly. "My mom really wanted to meet her biological father," he said. "She thought she'd never get the chance." One evening, as the sun set over the Mississippi River, Harold stood with his daughter and grandsons, watching the water turn gold. He thought of the promise he had made in 1971, that he would come back. It had taken him a lifetime, but here they were. "The last time I saw her," he said softly, "she was only this big." He held out his arms to show the size of a small infant. Then he looked at her, at the woman she had become, and smiled. Now she's all grown up. For most of the world, the Vietnam War ended in 1975. But for Harold Setzer, it ended on a summer day in 2024, in the middle of an airport terminal, when a father finally held his daughter again.